part two of the ENC Academics Summer Sessions is Christian thinking in the secular academy. There is a small number of people, I suppose, in every nation who work in Christian academies, but most of the people involved in academic work are in the secular academy, and that prompts a pile of interesting questions, which I shall try and think through in the next little bit. So the first question before we get into how do we engage and so on and so forth is does Christianity belong in the secular academy at all? Does it have any place? And there are some non-Christians who say it does not, and there are some Christians who say it does not. And it's worth looking at those to at least set the stage to say, do we have any place whatsoever? So one of the reasons that gets put forward, and I'm going to put two arguments forward, and I've been presented with both of them within my place of work and within the church. So if you look at what we mean by secular, if secular, I took this in Merriam-Webster, not overtly or specifically religious. So this then faces us with two options. When we ask the question, does Christianity have a specific view on any given matter, whatever we're discussing, whether it is abortion or evolution or what we should do with government debt or anything, does Christianity have a specific, distinct view on the matter? And there are two options. The answer is either yes, in which case, within the secular academy, it's not appropriate to invoke Christianity, because anything that has a specific, distinctive religious view, you know, within the academy, we need to build consensus. We have to have Muslims and Christians and atheists and agnostics and Buddhists working alongside each other. And if you come with your specifically Christian view, well, not everyone can get on board with that. So anywhere where there's a specifically religious distinctive view, it's not appropriate to bring that into the academy. And if Christianity doesn't have a specific distinctive view on the matter, then it's not necessary to invoke Christianity within the academy, because you just say, well, you think the same as everyone else. So on this argument, secularity guarantees that we never need to invoke Christianity. Now, the problem that hits is what we mean by specifically religious. An interpretation of secular is that the secular academy or a secular system doesn't prefer one religious position over another. And that therefore says that an atheist position that says there is no God is a religious position. It takes a theological position. There is no God. And you cannot prefer a position that says there is no God over a position that says there is a God. And therefore, we bring Christianity into the academy, or Christianity has a place in the academy, exactly because we're not preferring one religion over another. And we cannot. So this book that I've got here, Roy Klaus's The Myth of Religious Neutrality, it would be nice if we could step back and say, okay, there's this sort of neutral view. And some people like to say, well, atheism is this religiously neutral view. But in fact, if you sort of think it through, you don't have to think it through that carefully. There is no neutral religious standpoint. And therefore, rather than hiding it and saying, well, we're going to pretend we've taken this neutral religious standpoint, it's better to actually bring the religious discussions into the open and have them explicitly. One example of this, where this comes out in a sort of non-religious setting, for example, if you have a political position, there is no neutral political position. So if let's take a Marxist philosopher, a Marxist political philosopher, you can have them teach a course on Marxism. Now, within a secular academy. Now, if they say everyone in my course has to be a Marxist by the end, well, that's not appropriate. If they say I'll only let you pass the course if you're a Marxist, no. But you can say you have to read Marxist works. You have to understand Marxism. You have to work out why people adopt this view and how this has implications for things if they do adopt this view. You can set that, and you can say, if you haven't engaged with Marxism, if you haven't understood Marxism, then you can't pass the exam. That's completely acceptable. And similarly within Christianity, within the secular academy, if you say only Christians can pass my course, that is a problem within the secular academy. But if you teach a course that you say, I am going to present Christian views, these are significant on the world stage, and you need to engage with them. You need to read the set text, and you need to understand why people might adopt them, and you need to understand the implications of adopting those. You can say that within the secular academy. So that's one thought. Another objection that people have, which says that Christianity doesn't belong in the secular academy, and this I usually hear from Christians, but I have heard it from non-Christians, that says Christians should proselytize. I had one non-Christian colleague that says if Christianity is as good as you say it is, you should be proselytizing. And Christians are not allowed to proselytize on a secular campus in most places, in most contexts, in most countries, though it varies from country to country. And if Christians should proselytize and we can't proselytize on campus, then Christianity has no place on campus. I've been in universities where I've told them what I do with my various bits of research, and they said that's really nice, but we cannot do it in this country. It would be banned. And the trick here is actually what this assumes is Christians should only proselytize. There is nothing for a Christian to do that is not proselytization. And if that is true, if the only thing a Christian should do on campus is proselytizing, then yes, we have to remove Christianity from campus. But as I hope to show in the next bit of the talk, that's not the only thing that Christians can and should be doing on campus. So there are three aspects of ways in which Christianity can be involved on the secular academy, which I am going to discuss today. One is an intrinsic aspect of Christianity where Christianity is involved, and Christianity, you cannot do it any other way. One is implicit, where Christianity is involved, but you don't need to draw attention to it. And one is explicit, where Christianity is involved and you point directly at it and you go, look at this. And there aren't hard boundaries between these. As I go through examples, they're going to shade into each other. And there are some where you go, well, this is kind of implicit or could be explicit, so on and so forth. So these aren't hard and fast boundaries. It's just a way that I've sort of shaped some, like clumped some ideas. Starting with intrinsic, where Christianity is involved and you can't do it any other way. And again, each of the examples I bring is an example. This is not an exhaustive. This is every possible way in which Christianity is intrinsic or implicit or so on and so forth. But these are just examples. So good Christian practice is good academic practice. If I'm an academic and I say I only have 3 months of funding left, well, I need to develop within me peace. If I don't have peace, then I really am not going to make it past my second round of grant funding. I can't have my trust as an academic relying on my funding. Cannot. I become a better academic by saying I have peace, and my peace does not come from my job security. I write a book or I write a paper and it takes forever. And I, as an academic, I'd like to say I wish I could just short circuit this. I'll self-publish. I won't bother going through the checks. I'll just get annoyed with the reviewers and go and publish it somewhere else or whatever, right? But a good academic needs to exhibit patience. I have a project that I'm doing, and another project comes along that's a really nice project. It looks really exciting, but I'm halfway through this project and I don't want to leave my students in the lurch. I don't want to leave my university in the lurch. I don't want to just abandon them. I show faithfulness to my students, to my project, to my subject, to my department, to my university. And showing I could just be selfish. I could say, no, that one's much more interesting. I'm going to go and do that. Or I could be faithful. My colleagues might say things that I disagree with, things that aren't fully thought through, things where I think I have much better ideas. But I sit on my thumbs and I let my colleagues speak. And so I have to exhibit self-control. Now, these things are intrinsic parts of being a good academic, and they are intrinsic parts of being a good Christian. If you're a good Christian, you get to be a better academic. And if you're a good academic, as you develop these academic skills, you get to foster within yourself the fruits of the Spirit. Now, I genuinely once had a colleague that says, I cannot proselytize on campus. If I make Christianity attractive, people might want to become a Christian. And because I can't get people to become a Christian and evangelize, I can't make Christianity look attractive. Now, if I'm patient, normally I'm a patient person, but if I'm patient, I'm different from everyone else in my department, and people ask me why I'm patient, and then they might become Christians, and I can't do that. So I have to be impatient and bitter, and I have to gossip and backbite because that's what everyone else in my department does. And if I don't do those things, then people will find my Christianity really attractive, and I can't do that on campus. Now, clearly, that's ridiculous. That is absolutely absurd. And if being a good academic, if being patient and peaceable, and faithful makes you a good academic, and you get it drawing on your Christianity, be a good academic. So here we have fruits of the spirit. In fact, arguably all of these fruits of the spirit make you a good academic. And one that is kind of interesting is love. What does it mean for a good academic to love? So there's taking some quotes. This one is from Mary Midgley. Mary Midgley was a philosopher of science, is not a Christian. But she says knowledge is not just power, it's a loving union. She argued that we have to love our subject. If I am doing political science and I am investigating, understanding Vladimir Putin, I need to love Vladimir Putin. I cannot simply be interested in him. I cannot simply want to have power over the Russians. I have to love him. I don't have to agree with him, but I am required to love my subject. Says Mary Midgley, as a philosopher, not as a Christian. Maurice Wilkins, as a scientist, got the Nobel Prize for his work on DNA. Said love expresses the ideal scientific attitude, better than curiosity. Love includes curiosity, but curiosity need not include love. So as a chemist, biochemist, he argued, he said we need to love, have an attitude of love towards our science. So these are ways in which Christianity is involved, intrinsically involved with being an academic, and absolutely has a place within the academy. Part two, going to look at how Christianity can be involved in your academic work, but you don't necessarily need to point towards it. Intrinsic things, you don't need to point towards the fact that you are being patient. And you certainly don't need to point towards the fact that you are being patient because you're a Christian. People may make those connections, but a lot of the intrinsic things are also implicit things. Again, there are lots of ways in which this can work out, but the example I'm going to take is the way we frame things. So let's consider evaluation. Universities are great at evaluation. We evaluate each other all the time. We are sometimes required to evaluate each other. And you and some of them are formal evaluations and some of them are informal evaluations. When you meet a new academic, it's like, oh, what university are you at? And part of this is because you're interested in who they're connected to and who you might know and so on and so forth. And part of it is because you want to know if your university is better than theirs, right? We have university rankings. You know whether your university is better than someone else's university. And when they say, oh, I come from whatever, MIT, you're like, okay, I know where that goes in the rankings. When they say I come from wherever, and you evaluate yourself and you evaluate them as a comparison to where you are. Oh, you've got a new course. How many students do you teach? Oh, you've only got 20 students. What a shame. I've got 120 students on my course, right? As soon as we attach a number to it, we know where we stand in the rankings of, do I teach more students than you? Where do you publish, right? We know that Nature is better than PLOS One or wherever, right? We evaluate our papers not on, is this a good paper, but did I publish it in a journal that's better than your journal? We do it to our students. Go to the top of the class, right? This is a ranking, right? Rankings are zero sum. When one student goes to the top of the class, another student has to leave being at the top of the class because there's only one top, right? Our evaluations of our students, our rankings of our students, we stick them on a curve. Right? The important point is not, this is what our students often think. The important point is not, did I get a particular grade, but did I get an above average grade? Did I get a grade that's in the top 10%, whatever, right? These are comparisons. And they're really, really problematic for the academy. They're really problematic for the academy. When you're sitting, just if you need to collaborate, for example, and this is a problem I came across in Hong Kong. I will not mention institutions, but every institution in Hong Kong knows where they are in the rankings. And they say, okay, if I collaborate with a university that's worse than me, they're going to benefit from the collaboration and they're going to come up in the rankings and I'm going to go down in the rankings. So I get harmed by collaborating with another university that's worse than me. I want to only collaborate with universities that's better than me. But of course, then the universities that are better than you look down at you and go, well, we're not collaborating with you because we'll pull you up and you'll come down. So this comparison, exactly because it's a zero-sum game, means that academics stop collaborating, which is really bad for the academy. And of course, Christianly, we know that this is a dumb way of looking at the world. Jesus said to his disciples, what were you arguing about on the way? And they'd been arguing about which one of them was greatest. So they just didn't answer him. They're like, Jesus, we were talking, right? They couldn't face up to saying, I wanted to know who was best, right? As Christianity tells us that rankings and comparative evaluations are a problem. Let's think of another way of framing things. We can frame an academic body, right? Someone in your university does novel research, and novel research is important. Someone else does repeat studies, and repeat studies are important. They don't get so highly cited. They don't go into the top journals. But if you say, I'm not going to do this repeat study because someone's done it before and it won't be highly cited and it's not going to go into a top journal, I want to do something new, then every experiment only gets done once. And that's a problem for the academy. But if we say we have an academic body where each part has a role to play, well, that allows collaboration, allows people to do things which are less honorable. Some people need to teach, some people need to write grants. And it's not as attractive. You don't get Nobel Prizes for teaching, you don't get Nobel Prizes for writing grants. But the university needs someone to write grants and it needs someone to teach. If we understand that we are a body working together and we're not making a comparison, you cannot compare the impact of teaching to the impact of research, no matter how much your research evaluation framework would like to. You can't do it. And the great thing is, as Christianity, we have form on this, right? If the ear should say, because I'm not an eye, I don't belong to the body, it would not, for that reason, stop being part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? If the whole academy was doing novel research, where would the repeat studies be? So when we think about the academy, when we talk about the academy, we can talk about the academy as a body rather than drawing on these rankings and evaluations. Now, we don't need to explicitly say, I'm talking about the academy as a body of academics because I'm a Christian. You know that here is a framework, here is a metaphor which contributes to a healthy functioning of the academy. And you can draw on a whole pile of Pauline theology and a whole pile of biblical theology to help you flesh out your thinking about the academy, about how we collaborate. And you don't need to explicitly tell people. You can if you want. They might accept it if you didn't tell them that you were drawing all of your ideas from Christianity, and they might not accept it if you did tell them. But you can implicitly draw on your Christianity, bring your Christianity to bear. You don't have to adopt the dumb ideas that the rest of the academy has because they don't have the inspiration to think of better ways of framing things. And again, this potentially makes Christianity attractive. People can look at you and go, I like the way you think about this. And then when they come to church, if they come to church and they're used to thinking about comparative evaluations and they go, okay, so that the pastor's the most important person, right? And then where does the students, where do they fit in this, right? If they're used to comparative evaluations, they then don't understand the church, and that's a stumbling block to them. Like, this place makes no sense. Whereas if you bring Christian frames into the academy, then they go, actually, these frames make a lot of sense. And then when they walk into the church, they go, oh, okay, I understand how this is working. You start to remove stumbling blocks for people, and you can make Christianity attractive, and you can be a better academic, and you can build up the academy and make the academy better. So, final one, explicit ways in which Christianity can get involved. And these are things where you can point directly at it and say, this is a Christian idea, and I'm raising it because it's a Christian idea. One example of this is selecting questions, right? And we discussed this, we touched on this in the first half of the session today, where we were talking about what questions are important. Why do we select particular questions? So, for example, there's a set of technological questions that one can ask, right? How can I make this faster? When I have my phone, right, I ask, how can I make my phone faster? How can I make my internet faster? How can I make my car faster? I'm trying to roll out a particular policy within government. How can I make policy roll out faster? Right, faster is good. How can I make it cheaper? There's a particular policy I have for my health service. How can I make my health service cheaper? How can I make my phone cheaper? How can I make whatever project cheaper? How can I make it more profitable? How can I make the manufacture of a phone more profitable? How can I make them rolling out of healthcare more profitable? Any question you have within the academy, whether you're talking about politics or technology or the humanities, how can I make running this art gallery more profitable? People are interested. How can I make it more efficient? How can I get more bang for my buck? These are questions that people ask. And if you write a proposal and you say, okay, this is what I'm going to try and do. I'm going to try and extract lithium from batteries more cheaply, right? That is an end in itself. You don't have to justify why more cheaply is a good thing. It's obvious. Yeah, if your project can do this more cheaply, obviously that's good. Now, there are other questions that you can ask. I'm not saying these questions are wrong. They are questions, but they're not the only questions that we can ask. There are humane questions, for example, that we can ask. How could this be kinder? There is a project that I'm currently getting involved in where someone came to me and they said, I have a supercomputer. I know how to make my supercomputer fast and cheap. How can I make my supercomputer kind? And it's a question. It's a research question. We can do research on this. There's nothing wrong with that question. And it's, by many measures, a really interesting one. We can ask, whatever particular implementation I want to have, who suffers because of this? Often it might be who suffers exactly because I've made it faster or cheaper or more profitable. How can I mitigate that suffering? This is a question. It's not a question that ever comes up when you're saying, how can I make something cheaper or more profitable or more efficient? Mitigation of suffering is rarely the cheaper option. And you might spend your entire life asking technological questions and never consider questions of suffering mitigation. But that doesn't mean that they're not questions. It doesn't mean they're not questions that can be entirely validly asked within the academy. How can this particular idea or implementation or project be of benefit to the poor or the weak or the outcast? This is an entirely appropriate, valid question that can be asked within the academy. And they're questions that tech pros rarely ask. But yet, as a Christian, we know they're good questions to ask. How can this be kinder? How can this mitigate suffering? Or how can this benefit the poor? Is always, for a Christian, a good question to ask. Learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless, plead the widow's cause, right? Now, this is an explicitly Christian question, and you can bring it to the academy, and the academy doesn't need to say that's not a question or that question is wrong. They might say, I don't care about that question, I just want to make it faster. They're welcome to say that. But these are questions that you can bring. And one of the key aspects here is one of the problems that often comes up when I'm talking to people about thinking Christianly about things on campus is they have this view that says Christianity shuts down, or religion in general, shuts down discussions. Christian professors have said to me, why would I bring my Christianity on campus? I want to do interesting research without being bound by Christian considerations. And so you think, okay, I can do engineering and I can do this project and this project, but because I'm a Christian, I can't do things for the military. Or I can do this and this and this. I'm going to do medicine, but because I'm a Christian, I can't do this aspect of medicine. And so often Christianity is viewed as being something which shuts down questions. You've got all of these questions that non-Christians can ask, and then a subset that Christians can ask. Whereas in fact, we have this fantastic thing that says, no. Here are the questions that you usually think about. And here are the questions that you're missing out because it just doesn't occur to you, right? But they can occur to you. And this is one of the wonderful things. How can this be kinder? It might not occur to someone who's been trained on technological questions to make their technology kinder. But once it's occurred to them, once you bring it to the table, it's not something that only Christians can study. Non-Christians can study kind technology or how to alleviate suffering. So this is, again, we're going back to the secular academy. It's not just you have to be a Christian to study this. No, anyone can study it, but it should be at the forefront of Christians' minds that this should be a question that we really should be asking. And then we open out for the academy. We offer a richness, we offer newness to the academy to ask questions that maybe other people aren't asking. And again, this makes Christianity attractive. If people view Christianity as saying we're just shutting down to this and Christians can't ask those questions, then they say, I'm not sure I want to be that because they just limit my research. Whereas if you're saying Christians come up with these really great ideas, whole new vistas of research that you never really thought of, they're like, wow, I want to talk to Christians exactly because they have brilliant ideas for my research. So I'm going to give two examples of how this can work out in practice. One where I think Christians drop the ball and it's a real shame, and one where Christians have picked up the ball and I think it's worked really well. So one is looking at technology, technological questions and inequality. It has been noted that like there's this argument that says, oh, technology is neutral. It's just a phone, right? You do with it what you choose to do. It doesn't force you to do anything. But actually technology systematically, and I'm not going to justify it here, but here we go. Technology systematically tends to increase inequality, and it makes an unequal society faster, cheaper, and more efficiently. And that's a problem. When we can oppress people really efficiently, that's a problem. And technology is very good at that. And people who think about technology and ask questions like, how can I make this faster and cheaper, tend not to notice the people they crush on the way. Whereas people who look at technology and say, how can I make this kinder? How can I think about those who are suffering because of this particular implementation? They have an entire research field. Surveillance, for example, when we look at people, it becomes a question of power. And when we make decisions about people, it becomes a question of discrimination. Discrimination, a lot of it tends to discriminate against the poor, the weak, the outcast, minorities, people of color, immigrants. And then on a positive note, you can say, okay, well, let's take that into account. How can we take this? How can we build a better story? How can we build a positive story? How can we actually move forward, recognizing there is this problem? How can we take AI? How can we take technology? How can we take big data and use it not only in a way that doesn't oppress the poor and the weak? How can we actually build up these people? But then we also say, okay, it's not just, for example, people of color who are being oppressed, and it's not an accident. It's deliberate, and it's across categories of the poor, the weak, the voiceless, the underrepresented, the immigrant, the alien, the fatherless. Systematically, this is a problem. And so you have, for example, feminists coming in who's saying, hey, women are being oppressed by this technology, and we need to think about this. We need to push back against it. It covers a whole variety of topics, and there is a whole field here. And I think so. All of these books have been written in the last 10 years, all looking at the kind of things that sort of tech bros in Silicon Valley who worry about faster and cheaper and more efficient have missed. And these are all academics writing these books. These are all academic books. And all of these are topics which are entirely valid within the academy. And all of these are topics on which Christianity has something to say. And the thing in this particular discipline, as far as I can tell, I could be wrong, and I'm very happy to be pointing in a different direction. But Christianity is, in many senses, behind the curve on this. That there are people who are pushing this and saying we need to be asking these questions, and Christians are in many senses playing catch up. But here's an aspect where we can, now that someone else has pointed it out, we can bring Christianity to bear. And we can do so implicitly by just addressing these questions, and we don't need to hang it on and say you should accept this because it's a Christian view. We can do it implicitly, or we can do it explicitly. We can say, okay, the Christianity has done a lot of thinking about poverty and oppression and alleviation of suffering. We've got thousands of years of history which we can bring to bear without having to reinvent the wheel, and now we can apply it in this topic, which is of pressing relevance within the academy now. Another example where actually Christianity, I think, is doing rather much better, where it is ahead of the curve, is saying with questions of the environment, with questions of ecology, um, Christianity has something to say. I didn't have time to put on Laudato Si onto this slide, but I mean, when the Pope stepped in with his encyclical on the care of our common home, this was huge. That a Christian, the Pope no less, was stepping into an ecological argument and saying, okay, it's nice that you're doing this science. The science is great. I'm not in any way gainsaying the science, but you need to understand it's not just a scientific question. It is a moral question. It is a religious question. When the world gets hotter, the people that can afford air conditioning are not the people that are suffering. The people that created the carbon to burn that means we need the air conditioning are not the people who are now cannot afford the air conditioning. There is a moral question and there is a moral responsibility. And all of a sudden, a lot of people sat up and went, wow, this is something where Christianity can speak explicitly to a question that the Academy really cares about. So, I mean, for example, Jonathan Moo here, Hope in an Age of Despair. One of the problems we face with environmentalism and the environmental crisis that we face down is it can seem rather dispiriting. How can we have hope when it seems like we're doing too little too late? What do we do in a world? How do we act when we're not sure what the outcome is going to be? How do we act when we are sure what the outcome is going to be and we're not sure it's the outcome we want? These are thoughts that Christianity has been asking for a very long time. Jonathan Moo actually did a paper looking at eschatology and taking Christian eschatology and the end of the world and relating it to the language that happens in the ecological movements of people saying it's the end of the world as we know it, and saying you guys are having these discussions and you're just learning to walk, but theologians have been doing this for thousands of years. You can just draw on our wisdom and our insight and our understanding and our experience. You don't have to become a Christian in order to draw on what we've said, but there's some interesting stuff that you might want to read. So pile of books here, but this is something where Christians really are stepping up to the plate and saying what the Bible says about creation is of interest to people who care about the environment. And actually, in Hong Kong, I had atheist scientists, atheist ecologists who came up to me and they said, Mike, we've heard about what you're doing. Can you bring theologians, Christian theologians, to talk to us, to help us to do the kind of science we are trying to do because we think they have some great ideas that we could really benefit from? And again, this makes Christianity really attractive. It's really hard to say, oh, Christianity is irrelevant when you've just had a Christian theologian come in and give a lecture in your department on ecology. And this is entirely appropriate within the secular academy. We're not saying you have to become a Christian. We're not saying you have to agree with everything the Bible says in order to understand that there are things that Christianity can appropriately, rightly, fruitfully, helpfully say within the academy. So with those being sort of three examples of ways in which things can happen in the secular academy, there's then a question that says, okay, can this work in practice? That's very nice in principle. Do we have any hope that this is really how things can work? And so one example that one can draw on is how Oxford does things. And this is when you're talking to your home university, you can say to them, I'm not pressuring you. You don't have to do it this way. Here are some things that Oxford chooses to do, and if you don't want to be like Oxford, that's up to you. But just for your information. This is the way Oxford involves Christian thinking. So they have the Centre for Christianity and Culture, where explicit engagement with culture. They have the Centre for Theology and Modern European Thought. So what theology has to say about the politics or like different ideas going around within contemporary Europe. They have the Ian Ramsey Centre for Science and Religion. So discussions, for example, as from earlier about science and religion, they have within the University of Oxford. It's a established research centre within the university, not some spun out thing. It's within the university. They have a research centre which attracts research funding, doing research on the engagement between science and religion. The McDonald Centre for Theology, Ethics and Public Life. In case anyone thought that Christian theology has any impact on public life. Well, this research centre at Oxford thinks it does, and they think it's an entirely valid set of research questions within a secular academy. And Oxford's university rankings don't seem to have been hit too hard by the fact that they're having these discussions. Oxford Character Project, looking at the nature of character, virtue, moral philosophy within the academy. So these are all established research centres within Oxford University, and it's not the easiest argument to make that says, well, yes, Oxford can, but what kind of university are they? They're not really aiming for being a top high ranked university that's doing serious engaged research in a secular environment. No, Oxford's trying to do that, and this is the kind of things that they have going on within the university. Around the world, so that's an example of one university, but looking around the world, there are lots and lots of universities that do this. I've picked a sample here, one from each continent, just to say here are some examples of what's going on. These are all looking at the engagement of science and religion, again, sort of alluding to the first talk. So, within Canada, you've got Canadian Scientific and Christian Affiliation. Within Brazil, you've got the Brazilian Association of Christians in Science. In France, this also goes out into Switzerland. In Kenya, in Japan, Christian Scholars Fellowship, and in Australia, you've got ISCAST. Now, these are all groups of academics broadly established within universities, which are engaging in these kind of questions. There are many, many, many more of them. I just thought I'd pick one from each continent to illustrate the point. And while this is looking at science and religion, there are similarly groups if you're looking at law, or if you're looking at medicine, or if you're looking at the arts. There are, for any given continent, for any given country, for any given discipline, there are groups of Christian scholars who are engaging in this kind of thing. And for anyone who can't find their discipline in their country, drop me a note afterwards and I will try and dig it out for you. But there are lots of them. More generally, equipping Christian scholars across disciplines and across countries. Here are a selection of groups. The Society of Christian Scholars, Faculty Commons, Global Scholars, European Leadership Forum, and the Global Faculty Initiative. All of these are professional organizations reaching out to and equipping scholars. And some of them are explicitly in secular institutions. There are some where the membership requirement is that you have to be a faculty member in a university that does not have a statement of faith. So it's explicitly equipping Christian scholars who are within the secular academy. Also, I mean, other resources. I mean, I've flagged a whole pile of books previously, but on any given discipline, Christian perspectives on, for example, science or technology or maths or sociology or the natural environment, the built environment, law, finance. There are Christians thinking about how their discipline engages with the academy. And all of these books, as I've just rushed through them, all of these books, I know contexts in which colleagues have set them as required reading for their courses within the secular academy, where they've said, okay, in order to understand Beethoven, you have to understand Beethoven's Christianity. You don't need to agree with Beethoven's Christianity, but you have to engage with these particular theological concepts which Beethoven understood, which influenced Beethoven's music. And without understanding those influences, you can't understand Beethoven. And so Daniel Trial can set this as a course book and say you need to engage with these. Um, and see, these are instances where we can bring Christian thought for the enrichment of the academy. I think that is then okay. Now we're going to go on to adverts and closing up things. So I shall mention these.